Now this here, that monument over there is the New South Wales-Queensland border. And this bit of, roadworks barricade is the infamous red fence. G'day folks, welcome to the channel. You're here with the big fella, and straight off the bat I've got an apology to make. I haven't really been prioritising my uploads all that much lately. There's been far too much else to do in life. I think it's probably about 8 months since I moved from my previous place and moved again in that time as well. So regular uploads have been kind of put on the back burner. As much as I don't like to do it, it has to be a priority. So basically I've got a fair bit of backload to go through. Today's episode is more about the Queensland and New South Wales border and how the COVID pandemic had separated one state from another. Basically putting two states, actually more than two states, just New South Wales and Queensland, but the rest of the country as well, at each other. We couldn't get into Queensland, no matter who you were from another state or another country, you couldn't get into Queensland because the Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, was very militant about her decision to exclude people from the Queensland area and try to keep it as COVID-free as possible. So I have a couple of news clippings that I wanted to show you from back in those days. So I believe it was probably about maybe December of last year, and we'll show you just what we're talking about. Now, what we had to deal with was something called, well, locals called the red wall or the red fence. It was just basically a red construction fence, just made of plastic. It wasn't all that high. People could scale it any time they wanted to if they had the balls to, because it was being watched by a lot of people. But there were always people assembled at this this bit of construction fence, this red fence as they called it. And they were always catching up with people that they would usually say hello to, family, friends, whatever. The border is Tweed Heads on the New South Wales side and Coolangatta on the Queensland side. And people who would usually get to say hello to each other in person, or without obstructions in this case, would have to contend with this red fence instead. And because one person's decision to not let other people over the border, that's what it came to. So that's the news excerpts that I wanted to show you today in particular, and how I believe the decision of one person basically was so divisive that it separated a lot of the country for the time that they were excluded from Queensland.
Anastasia Palaszczuk hasn't ruled out reopening the border earlier at that magic 80% mark, but would you support that even with the concern over Omicron?
Oh, well, it's a government decision, of course. It's not the AMA's. We're tracking pretty well considering we've been largely spared from COVID issues. We've had no community transmission deaths in Queensland basically ever. When most of Queensland's not locked down, most of Queensland doesn't have masks. We've done it pretty well, and we want to continue that way. But we have to open up, and we want to do it when we're fully as vaccinated as best we can. Omicron's highly infectious. They've got quite a few cases in the community. It's going to continue to spread.
Welcome back. Well, there's no turning back now for New South Wales and Victoria. The premiers agreeing on a joint strategy of no more lockdowns and keeping their borders open despite the growing spread of Omicron. It's also a big day for Queensland. Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk expected to announce today just when the Sunshine State will reopen its borders, and it could come early.
Because we are going to have to learn to live with this. We just can't put ourselves under the doona forever. We've done a great job, and I congratulate the premiers, but it is now time to take that bold step, to trust one another, to take each other's hands and move forward together. And, you know, and I think if New South Wales and Victoria, the most populous states, can do that, I think that sends a very strong message to the rest of the states that we actually do need to work together. We can come through this. We're going to have to learn. Australians have put their arms out. Nearly every state's now nearly hit the 80% double jab rate, which under the national plans means that large-scale lockdowns are no longer required. So if we stick to the plan, we trust one another.
David, I want to ask ask you quickly about the Queensland border. It seems Anastasia Palaszczuk will make that announcement later today on whether or not she will bring the reopening date forward. That's something that means a lot to you, being stuck in Canberra at the moment. What do you think about the possibility or the likelihood of the Queensland Premier bringing that reopening date forward from December 17?
Yeah, look, Canberra's a great place to visit, but nothing beats home and nothing beats Queensland. So I'm hoping today that the Premier will fall into line. We will hit the 80% double vaccination rate sometime this week. So it just makes sense that she gets in lockstep with New South Wales and Victoria. And I get in Queensland, we haven't had the cases they have in New South Wales and Victoria. But as Queenslanders, we've got to appreciate it's coming. Whether we keep our borders locked forever, some way it'll get through. And that's what history's shown us through this pandemic, that it will find its way through. And then we'll be where the rest of the states are. So we've got to take that leap of faith, take the double jab, get it to 80%, stick to the national plan and get our country open again and let families reunite for Christmas. And I just hope the Premier holds a nerve.
Charles, tell us about the feeling on board that flight.
Sylvia, it was excellent. It was such a nice feeling to be on there and feel everyone a sense of relief.
You knew you were on your way. All those people, all those families who've been waiting so long for the border to come down.
Well, David, so many people haven't flown for so long as well, so it's that foreign feeling about it. So much relief, so much excitement, and just this overriding sense of normality coming back as well, which has just been so long.
How was the process when you got off the plane in terms of checking border passes? Was it very rigorous?
Non-existent, Sylvia, and that is the surprising part of the whole thing. We've walked off the plane, we've walked out here. This is the reception. There were no checks at all. And that's been the really surprising part. We got asked before we left, had we gone through that process, but at no stage has anyone here or anyone beforehand checked those border passes. So that's going to be an area of concern. There doesn't seem to be any security points.
Today reporter Jessica Millwood in Coolangatta. Jess, it's a big day there.
A very, very happy day, David. Good morning to you. This morning, Australia is one step closer to being whole again. Queensland has reopened to the southern states, and what a momentous day it is indeed. Thousands of people coming across the border via road this morning at 1 a.m. I'm here at Griffith Street and it's looking very good, but there was a line-up at 1, people that just couldn't wait one more minute to get into Queensland. Thousands more will be flying into the Sunshine State today. 141 very long days. That is how long the border has been shut. 435 all up across the pandemic.
Today reporter Mia Glover is among those lining up to cross the border from New South Wales now. Mia, what's the process like for those who are driving into the Sunshine State?
Well, Sylvia, yeah, it is a bit of a process for people. You will need a border pass like the one that we've got here, but it's still not as bad as what authorities were predicting. It's about a 17 to 20 minute wait at the moment here on the M1 as we try to enter Queensland. But the border pass, you have to have that. Not only do you have to have that, you've also got to show proof of your vaccination status because only the vaxxed are allowed back into Queensland.
Now, as you could see through those clips, the consensus to reopen the border to Queensland was made largely on the premise that the double jab or the vaccine program had gone to about 80% of the population. So double jab for New South Wales and or Queensland and anywhere else within Australia. So if they could meet that quota, then yeah, the Premier was going to take down the border and say, okay, yeah, you can come back into Queensland now. But ask anyone, especially from either New South Wales or Queensland, how Anastasia Palaszczuk has handled this situation. Now, the bottom line is she's handled this from an extremely hardline stance. Now, for her, it was never about people not being able to see each other or families being separated because you know, they're on the wrong side of one border or one wall or something. It was about not bringing COVID into Queensland, period. Now that was her stance, incredibly hardline and very unempathetic. And the overwhelming majority of the people had a lot of criticism about her and still do right now, because for her it was all about numbers. It was never about people. So, as you can see there, I was rather surprised about the lack of declarations or certification that you needed to get off a plane, say from either New South Wales or Victoria, anywhere else in Australia, to get back into Queensland. And there was no one to check any of these certifications that you had to go through all this rigmarole to fill in and, you know, expect someone to check it for you. There was no one there, and that was the really surprising thing. It wasn't so with the border from on the road, the M1 between New South Wales and Queensland. There were still people lined up there to go in there. Now, as it says, it was probably not very long to actually go in because the traffic was flowing smoothly once again. There were still troops, either New South Wales Police, Australian Defence Force personnel, still lined up at checkpoints, but all they were doing was basically holding a position. They weren't actually doing anything because the decision had been made to take down the border wall and to remove the checkpoints. So what they did was basically just, they were nothing more than a roadblock. So once they took those down, then yeah, people were free to go back into Queensland and travel either way between New South Wales and Queensland, which is the border in question.
Well, we're at Tweed Heads right now, and there appears to be a hard border up here. Just past this set of traffic lights here is Twin Towns, and we're going up just to the New South Wales Queensland border, which is a hard border right now because they're not letting anyone across. There's a lot of people that actually live in Queensland that aren't being allowed back into Queensland. That's how hard the restrictions are right now. And this is what it's like all the way up to the border, which is about a couple hundred metres up the road. So I was just walking through a car park here now. There's Twin Towns Services Club and Resort. And just up past here is the border. And traffic is really, really slow going. And out here, just opposite the Twin Towns Services Club, we have our own little Hollywood Walk of Fame. Got our own little lot of stars around here. Never really noticed this before, but this is what you get for walking along this path, I suppose. Now this here, that monument over there is the New South Wales Queensland border. And this bit of, well, roadworks barricade is the infamous red fence. So it goes a lot longer than this, but this is just one section of it. So no one on this side of the border, the New South Wales side, is allowed to go over to the other side, technically. And just up here we have what looks like the local constabulary doing their job at a checkpoint. And looks like we've got some people setting up for a bit of a news broadcast or a segment for a news spot. SES tent and more constabulary. And the funny Queensland Highway Patrol cars. Credentials, like if you got a pass, if you got been vaccinated, all that kind of thing. So.
Vaccinated and pass, and for example, appointment for a doctor.
Yeah, in Queensland. In
Queensland.
So.
Or only pass for border is enough.
Yeah, you'd have to ask them if you're allowed to go across there, but that, to me, I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah. Because today is very busy.
Yeah, but you might even have to find a doctor on the New South Wales side, not the Queensland side. Well, I spoke to a nice naval officer that was standing there at the checkpoint, and he said that this street, which he called Border Street or Border Road, it's actually called Boundary Street, so close enough, just the wrong name. But I'm not seeing any red fence anywhere. So that's as far up as I can see, right to the top of that hill there. But I'm still missing this elusive red fence. Now, unless he was talking about further down that way, which still I can't see very much of the red fence, but that's on the Queensland side. So I really don't know. I'm going to take a little walk down Marine Parade, see what I can find. So Coolangatta is officially the border. It separates Tweed Heads from, well, Tweed Heads is New South Wales and Coolangatta is Queensland. So down here, besides this construction site where they're actually tearing down a building, I really don't see any fence. That footpath there, very broad footpath that leads just adjacent to the beach. No, there's no fence. No, not here, not anywhere along here. It's very quiet though. a lot less busy than it usually is. So I'm thinking that naval officer was saying something about an area that was in Queensland, not necessarily in New South Wales. So I'm going to go by that because I cannot see where this fence is. And I was told it was along the border between New South Wales and Queensland. Anyway, we're going to head back and go back home. So after having a chat with some friendly locals just back there, it appears that the red fence actually goes in behind this block of apartments over here, and it's more extending onto the New South Wales side. What we can see is New South Wales anyway. So this great big monument, which we've lauded for years, is well, a point of division instead of bringing together right now. Imagine that. You can see this is coming from Queensland into New South Wales now, and this side of the road is absolutely bare. I'll just go across. Okay, so in behind these buildings, in behind that high rise behind there, apparently are the streets that contain the red fence. As it turned out, I actually walked across the border there several times and I was completely unchallenged. There was no one at the border to stop me, except further up where the official checkpoint was. So you could say if you're on foot, you could get across there. Illegal, but you can still do it.
Now, regarding COVID and other states in Australia at the time, there was a rather hardline stance from Western Australia as well, even more hardline than Queensland. But because Western Australia wasn't as much in the news as Anastasia Palaszczuk was, and her decision to be so cruel with all these families that have been separated on the wrong side of the wall as such, West Australia kind of took a backseat in the whole news thing. I mean, it was there, but sidelined. You know, it was just as much of a hardline approach from the West Australian Premier to do that, but Anastasia Palaszczuk was very much in the firing line for her decision to do that rather than West Australia. But the only flack West Australia actually copped was for people that were stuck outside of West Australia trying to get back in. So the Western Australian border has only been open since the 3rd of March this year, so this is now 2022. But the Queensland border was reopened, I believe, sometime in the middle of December last year. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, the obstacles that you had to face to get back to where you came from if you were travelling interstate or something. If you're on the wrong side of the border from where you came, then yeah, you're going to be stuck there. Maybe you had to have an extended stay at a hotel or something, I don't know. But this was the case for both Queensland and Western Australia, but less Western Australia than Queensland. But still, a pretty horrendous time for Australia, just because of one disease that kind of migrated off a cruise ship originally. I have more feeds coming soon, which are more to do with the house and the transformation that it's actually taken over the last, well, nearly 7 or 8 months. And yeah, it's quite a vast one. But we got it pretty much for a fairly good price, but we've invested quite a bit to get it back up to scratch because it was nowhere near the standard that you'd want to live in. It had barely any power points, no technology whatsoever. One TV point, no internet access, the whole lot, you know. So there's a lot of things that had to be done, and it's not just around the house, it was also through the backyard, the front yard, a lot of stuff. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned, subscribe, and drop a comment if you feel like about the whole COVID situation. I know it was a whole mess, but now it's all over, and yeah, Omicron is basically still around, but most people are vaccinated enough that they're keeping the hospital system mostly free, more free than it would have been if people weren't vaccinated. So pro or anti-vax, doesn't matter. Leave a comment, tell us what you think. Anyway, that's it for now. Have a good one. You're with the big fella. Catch you next time.